What causes some states to be gaining population, to have an economy that's getting better, other states to have an economy that's going down and they're losing population? Is it related to things like the tax rate in that state relative to others? Is it related to maybe the regulation in that state, whether it's a right to work state or not? Is it related to other factors? Don't you click that remote, because if you do, you're going to miss a really good show with our guest, Steve Moore. So we're speaking here on July 18th, the year 2014. We're speaking with Steve Moore. He and three authors have written a new book, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of the States. Little takeoff on Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations,
exactly.
right? There's The Wealth of States. So let's just give it to him straight, Steve. We'll get back to a little bit more, everybody knows you used to write for the Wall Street Journal, on the editorial board for the Wall Street Journal. You're now the chief economist at the Heritage Foundation. So getting right to it, if you had to say, what's the most important thing, the most important takeaway from this book?
Well, I think it's that state policies really matter in terms of which states prosper and create jobs and create businesses and opportunities for their citizens, and which states are falling behind. And we're seeing that issues like taxation, issues like regulation, issues like right to work laws all have very dramatic impacts on how fast a state economy develops and where the jobs are flowing to.
So one of your co-authors is Art Laffer. He became well known for the Laffer curve.
Sure did.
Supply side economics really took off in the 80s, I guess, with Ronald Reagan and the tax cuts of the 80s, followed by the Bush tax cuts in the early 2001, 2002. So is there anything new here? Because everybody would think, well, most people would say, who are believers in the supply side, they would say if you lower taxes, other things equal, you will improve the economy.
Well, what we show in this book is that...
I should say if you lower the tax rates.
The tax rates, right. And what we show in the book is that the states that really have very high tax rates, like California, and like New York, and like New Jersey, and states like Rhode Island, are falling significantly behind in terms of job creation, in terms of incomes, than when you compare them with states. There's 9 states in this country that have no income tax at all. Tennessee and Texas and New Hampshire and Florida and states like Nevada. And those states are creating 2 to 3 times as many new jobs as states like California and Illinois and New York.
Well, and we're taping this in Illinois, right? Mm-hmm. And the income tax rate, the individual income tax rate, corporate income tax rate came into effect, I think, in the late 60s here in Illinois. But everybody who kind of grows up thinks it's natural to pay a federal income tax, a state income tax, and they would say, well, my gosh, how can you get by without having an income tax?
And that's a great question, right? And,
how can you get by, Steve?
You
got to pay for education,
exactly. You got to pay roads, and you got to have police, and you got a fire service.
So how do you do this?
Well, there's 9 states that do it real well. If we're just trying to imagine whether this could happen, a lot of people would say, well, it just can't possibly happen. You can't possibly pay for your services without an income
What are
tax.
those states? What are some of those states?
Those are states like Texas and Tennessee and Florida and New Hampshire and
a range of
South
states
Dakota,
from
north to south, from east to west. And what we find is that those states are doing really well economically. Now, look, I'm not here saying that taxes are the only thing that matters, and you can always point to places like San Francisco where taxes are very high that are doing very well. But on balance, the preponderance of the evidence around the country shows that where tax rates are lower, that's where capital and jobs flow to. And the fact that there are 9 states that actually provide good public services, I would argue, for example, the schools in most areas of Texas are better than the schools in most areas of Illinois, and yet Illinois has an income tax. The public schools. Right, and the poverty rate is higher in Illinois than it is in Texas, even though Illinois is still a richer state than Texas is. You don't see too many people moving from Florida to Illinois, but you do see a lot of people moving from Illinois to Florida.
All right, so taxes is certainly one thing,
Yeah.
giving people the broad overview. Is there anything else that your book highlights in terms of a major emphasis for improving the economy of states, other than trying to keep the income and other tax rates low.
The other big factor we found was whether a state has what's called a right to work law. And a right to work law is a law that basically says that workers cannot be compelled against their wishes to join a union. It doesn't say you can't have unions, it simply says you can't be forced to join a union if you don't want to. And those states, and it turns out about half the states in the United States have right to work laws and about half of them don't. Illinois, unfortunately, is a state that does not allow the right to work. You're a forced union state. Those states do very poorly in the jobs chase. A lot of businessmen and women that we interviewed for this book who run major companies and make decisions about where new plants and facilities and stores are going to be located say we don't even consider moving into states if they're not a right to work state. So if you were to ask me what is the most immediate thing Illinois could do if it wanted to be really serious about providing hundreds of thousands of new jobs for the people of this great state, I would say become a right to work law and you're back in the game.
What do right to work laws really do?
Well, look, a right to work law is simply a law that enables workers in a state to decide whether they want to join a union or not. It doesn't say you can't have a union in your state. Of course, you can. This is a right of association. It's protected by the First Amendment. People can associate with a union if they want to. What the right to work law says is you can't be compelled against your will as a worker to join that union and to have union dues taken out of your paycheck. And that's a basic freedom that I think every worker should have everywhere in America, but only half of the states allow that freedom, and Illinois, unfortunately, is not one of those states. Illinois, if you join a company that has a union plant, you have to pay union dues even if you don't want to. That's kind of confiscation of people's salaries.
But are they getting a free ride? That's what the unions would say. If you're there working at the company, if the union is representing you, whether you ask to or not, they're negotiating for you, they're getting higher wages, they're getting better working conditions. The guy or woman right next to you is paying, you're not. You're getting a free ride. What would you say to those folks?
Well, I would say, look, this worker doesn't want to be represented by that union. That worker doesn't want to be under the collective bargaining agreement for those workers working at that plant. Why shouldn't that worker be able to negotiate his or her own wage? One of the reasons when I talked to people, I was out in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where they voted down the union, the UAW, at a major Volkswagen plant there. And when I talked to the workers about why don't you want that union, they said, look, number one, we're not going to get higher wages and benefits from the union. In fact, they might even be lower because the union's going to take money out of my paycheck. Number two, a lot of the workers said, look, if you have a union, then your ability to climb up the ladder, and if you work harder than the other people and you're ambitious and you want to be the foreman and you want to be rewarded for your own performance, you can't really do that in a lot of union facilities because it's all a kind of collectivist mentality. And for the hardest working people, that's actually a disincentive in terms of getting ahead.
Just address that one point. So if the union, lots of economists have studied this, you know that.
Right.
Often they will argue that a negative to them, to a free market economist, is that the union pushes up the wage for those in the union relative to the free market wage, causing fewer people to be hired. But if that happens, the union might say, well, yes, we got a higher wage, and so the woman or man sitting right next to you, standing next to you working, is getting that higher wage, and so are you, even though you're not paying. So you've given a strong argument for why individuals should be free to negotiate this, but they're really not in many cases negotiating it. Once that union's there, they get the higher wage. The non-paying person gets it just as much as the paying person. So just address it when the union says, okay, but you're getting a free ride and you're not paying anything.
Well, the worker is basically saying, I don't want your negotiated wage. I want to be able to negotiate on my...
They'll get it.
Well, they'll get it, but in a lot of instances, the unions are taking money out of the worker's paycheck, and when you take into account all of those reductions, that worker may not be better off. That worker also may not be better off because his or her ability to succeed in the company and to negotiate, if I'm more productive than you are, and we both work at the same place, you know what? I want a higher salary than you get. That doesn't make me selfish. It's just the way that the world works. A lot of workers want to have a kind of pay for performance. Look at the schools in Chicago. My goodness, the unions have destroyed the schools in Chicago because you can't really reward the best teachers. You're losing your best teachers. Who are the ones that get the promotions? The ones with tenure. It's not based on any kind of competence. In fact, there are hundreds of teachers in the state of Illinois that have been declared incompetent that are still teaching in front of the classroom. I mean, that is an outrage.
All right, so let's take we'll do it very quickly, but since you raised the issue of schools, schools are very important when we talk about the states, when we talk about their economy, so we can slide into it that way. Let me just ask you, you've studied, in a sense, have you studied all 50 states in this book? Mm-hmm. Okay. So
we rank all the 50 states in terms of which have the best climate for growth.
Do you also look specifically at the impact of the quality of education provided in that state in terms of the impact on the economy and on attracting business and so forth? Okay.
Yes, and there's no question that if you have good schools and first-rate universities, you're going to be a place where businesses are going to want to locate. It's not an accident that Silicon Valley, that is creating so many hundreds of thousands of incredible jobs and amazing businesses and technologies, that's out of Silicon Valley, and it's no accident that happened right next to Stanford, which has one of the great engineering, and mathematics schools in the country. So, obviously schools do matter a lot. The point we make, though, is let's not measure how good those schools are based on how much you spend. Let's look at how, the achievement levels, because look, Illinois spends a lot of money per student on your schools, but you're one of the lower performing states in terms of academic achievement.
Is this based on test scores, standardized test scores?
Whether you look at test scores,
if we're talking
graduation
K
rates,
through 12?
yes.
Okay,
yes.
So kindergarten through 12th grade. Public schools.
Illinois doesn't, especially Chicago, does not stack up. And Chicago spends
is your output measure, your performance measure, is that mostly standardized tests?
It's both standardized tests, it's reading scores, and it's graduation rates. And on all of those measures, I mean, I'm not telling anything that anyone in Chicago doesn't already know. The Chicago public schools are an abomination. You rank very near the bottom. Now, there's some places where the schools are worse, like New York City and Detroit, but not too many places.
Is there any way, is in your view, I know you're a free market kind of guy, would you say the way to improve this is to give more school choice?
Of course.
Whether it's school vouchers, charter schools, so forth?
Not just school choice. I mean, yes, we do measure.
What do you mean by school choice?
Just giving parents a range of options.
Okay.
So in other words, if you're a lower middle class or poor or even middle class family, and you don't have the extra $20,000 a year to send your kid to a private school, why not give those parents and those kids just options, so you don't have to go to this school, you can go to this one or this one or this one.
How do you do that? Explain to people.
You give people, you can create charter schools where they're public schools, so you have options within the public school system.
Why are the charter schools an important option in your mind?
Because they, oftentimes they're specialized skills. So, I have 3 children myself. One thing you learn when you're a parent is that not all kids are created equal. All of them have different talents and different interests and different skills. And some have music skills, some have athletic skills.
What about their operation? Do they operate differently from what we'll call the traditional?
Yes, the regulations, it depends on the state and the city and the charter itself.
But on average, they have more flexibility.
They have much more flexibility. They can hire the teachers they want. They can fire the teachers. They can provide special programs.
They can pay, as we're talking about unions, where everybody gets the same. If somebody outperforms, even though they may have been teaching a shorter time period, they might get a higher salary.
Oh, of course. And
which never happens in the traditional neighborhood schools.
Because you can't.
It's a lockstep based on how many years.
That's right. I mean, there are some exceptions to this, but for the most part, and the evidence is really very encouraging on charter schools. But I would go beyond that. I mean, why not? You've got a lot of empty chairs in the Catholic school system. Why not maybe give some money to the parents and allow them to go to a Catholic school or some of the private schools that look, we do this with universities, right? We don't, when you graduate from high school, we don't say you have to go to this one college. We say, with the Pell Grant program, you can go to any school that you want to, that you can get into. Why not have that kind of system for our K through 12?
So in Chicago, and we're taping this in Wilmette, a suburb of Chicago, Illinois, we spend on the Chicago public schools, on average, about $15,000 per
That's
kid
a lot.
per year.
That's a
So
lot.
you're suggesting take that $15,000, give it to the parents, and if they want to go to a private school, parochial otherwise, they can. If they want to stay in the public school, they can. Would you do that?
There's a lot of different ways you
Fully
could
funded
do
school
it.
voucher.
Well, I mean, you could do it fully funded, like you're suggesting, or even give them, $5,000 voucher. I mean, so just a little extra incentive. And by the way, that would save money for the public schools because they would still be able to keep some of the money, but they wouldn't have that child that they'd have to
There would be
educate.
much more left per kid for the
Right,
kids who were
exactly,
left. Because
exactly.
as I said, if you spend $15,000 and you only give them $5,000,
Or whatever.
there's $10,000 more to spread
Exactly.
around.
And so that helps the kids that are, means more money per child in the public school system, and many of which are overcrowded anyway.
And yet the unions fiercely oppose
Of course,
school choice.
because they
Why do they oppose it?
Because they want to keep this kind of empire in place where they have complete control over the schools. Where the problem they have with charter schools and private schools and parochial schools is oftentimes those teachers are not union members. One of the things I think is a real tragedy about cities like Chicago, and I'm not picking. I love Chicago, by the way. I think it's one of the great cities in America.
Great lake. You got it.
It's a fantastic place, except for the brutal winters.
The beaches,
Oh yeah, I mean
the
it's-
art, the
Cubs.
culture,
There's
Cubs,
some
Wrigley Field.
everything.
I mean,
and
come on, you can't knock Chicago.
Oh, I can. I mean,
you can't knock Illinois.
If you're
can you?
gonna, no, I've always said, look, look, Chicago could be the Hong Kong of North America. It really could. I mean, there's no reason that the Chicago, one of the world-class cities anywhere on this planet, isn't doing much better. It's
And a major
tragic.
financial center. In
Yeah,
fact, the originator
exactly.
of many of the markets,
Right.
exchanges, etc. Here in
Exactly.
Chicago.
It could really blossom into a London or a Hong Kong. And the reason that's not happening is the politicians are holding the state.
Well, Karen Lewis, the Chicago Teachers Union president, you may have heard, is thinking for running for mayor. And actually, there's some polls showing that Karen Lewis recently, I'm not sure if the polls are accurate, is ahead in polling of Rahm Emanuel, the current mayor. What do you think? Karen Lewis is mayor?
I don't.
President of
First of
Chicago
all,
Teachers
I don't know Karen Lewis, and I don't. I mean, but the fact that
She's a
runs
very
the
strong
union-
advocate
right?
of
I'm sure she
She's
is.
very close to school vouchers.
I'm sure
which
she
won't
is.
come as a surprise to
But
you.
I would simply say this: that the de facto, the unions run the city. So this would just make it official if she became mayor. But that would be a catastrophe for the city if you actually put the head of the union actually in charge of running the city, because no one would then represent the school kids and the taxpayers. And this is a big problem. When you have collective bargaining and the politicians are elected by the very union leaders who then they are going to negotiate with, is it any surprise that a state like Illinois and a city like Chicago has massive unfunded liabilities? And for people who, look, I'm pro-teacher, but how can you provide a good salary to the incoming teachers when so many of your tax dollars are going to pay for the pensions and benefits of the teachers that are retired?
Okay, so in your book, you highlight the importance of the variation in taxes.
Yes.
Or tax rates, I
Yes.
should keep saying. The importance of dealing with the collective bargaining issue. As you say, the right to work state will allow more freedom.
Yes.
I mean, is that what you're saying? You're saying that you find right to work states outperform
About twice as
other
many
states.
jobs.
And what is the theory behind that?
Because businesses are getting very wary of union power. They want to be able to negotiate with their workers directly, and they will not. They just won't go to a state unless it has a right to work law.
So that's a proxy for less union power.
Yes,
which
exactly.
might mean wages that are closer to market wages as opposed to above wages. do you
It's
think?
not even so much about the level of the wages. I mean, look, when I was in Tennessee, Chattanooga, the union wasn't even going to pay the workers higher salaries. The union even admitted, we can't really match what Volkswagen's already providing.
So what was their attraction?
So
What's their selling point?
well, that was the whole point. Is the unions didn't see an attraction, and that's why they voted the union down. They said, "Wait, you're going to take money out of my?"
But if it's not the wage, you said, what is it that business is
They
concerned
want the
about?
flexibility. They don't want the unions telling them who you can and can't fire. They want to be able to promote the good workers. They want a kind of culture of freedom on the union, on the plant floor, and that just doesn't exist. The other thing that they recognize is, look, when you talk about an American company, they are competing against companies not just around the country, but around the world, and they need to have the flexibility to be able to expand and to contract and to hire the best workers, and all those kinds of freedoms are just lacking from many unionized plants.
So do you shift, you do have to generate revenue, you would agree, if you have a state government, if you have a city government, if you have a county government, requires revenues to operate.
Of course.
You're
You
not
have
an
to- you have to
anarchist.
pay for government.
I've heard you
Budget.
say there are certain functions that
Of
need to be
course.
performed by government.
Yes, you have to feed
So
police and fire and roads
what
and
taxes?
schools.
You would like to see the income tax in Illinois and other income tax states abolished. What do they replace it with? What sources of revenue, what sources of taxation are better in your mind?
Well, first of all, let me start by this, that most states with high income taxes are just bloated with government. So, Illinois, you spend way more on public services than do most states, and yet your public services in most cases are worse, not better. So you can cut your taxes and make your public services much more efficient. We have a chapter in our book comparing Texas and California, the two biggest states in the country. And what we find is, that California spends about 50% more on public services per capita than Texas does. But guess what? In most cases, the services are better in Texas. I believe if Illinois were to eliminate its income tax, and I would love to see that happen, and go back to the way it was in the 50s and 60s, when Illinois was one of the most prosperous states in the country, you could replace it with maybe shifting towards an income tax, towards a sales tax, but also becoming much, much more efficient in your public services.
So if you're going to abolish the income tax in various states, you're going to have to replace it with other taxes.
Yes.
What would you recommend?
Well, two things. First is for states like Illinois to become more efficient in the provision of your services. There's no reason why you couldn't cut your cost of services by 20 or 30% just by becoming more efficient and productive. Number two, you look at other taxes that don't do as much damage. User fees. You could broaden your sales tax so that right now about 40% of the consumption is not taxed in the state. And that's because special interest groups, like lawyers and accountants and so on, or barbers and
Well,
others.
services have generally, for a variety of reasons, not historically been taxed. That's what you're saying.
Yes, exactly.
Legal services, advertising services, accounting
Exactly.
services, etc.
And why not-
You're suggesting bringing those taxes under the general sales tax.
Yes, but eliminate your state income
Income
tax,
tax.
and that will bring businesses to Chicago and to the great state of Illinois.
Now, Bruce Rauner, as you know, is running for governor.
Mhm.
You've spoken highly. You knew a little bit about Bruce. Do you know
Right.
Bruce?
I am a huge fan of Bruce
Have you
Rauner.
met
I
him?
think it's the most important race anywhere in the country that he win. And I have met him many times. I am a great admirer of his, and I think he's running on exactly the right platform. Tax reform, school choice. If you want to win the minority vote, go to those black churches and go to those black neighborhoods and tell those black parents, we're going to provide a better education for your kids. I think he is going to be
By
a
having
great
choice, by having more charter
Exactly,
schools,
yes.
by having more options to exit the failing traditional neighborhood
Black
schools.
and Hispanic and Asian parents and low-income parents, they want their kids to have the best education possible. There's nothing that parents care more about than their children. And every parent understands that if you want a better future for your child, you've got to give them the best possible education you can. We're cheating those kids. The people... we are cheating the
Dealing with
kids.
some of the natural forces that go on, like dogs. That's
Exactly.
fine. can
We
deal
are
with
cheating
that.
those kids when we tell them you have to go to a failing school.
All right, and we find on polling that minorities, Hispanics and African Americans, are generally quite a bit in favor of charter schools.
Bruce
in
Rauner
favor
is
of
getting
school vouchers.
standing
Yeah,
ovations
yeah.
when he goes to black churches, when he goes into Latino
They want these
neighborhoods.
options. They want to be able to
They
leave a
do,
family
and they
neighborhood
can't
school.
afford it. You know, these are people who you know, live on $20,000, $30,000, $40,000.
Other people have options. Everybody likes
Exactly.
choices, but they just moved. They moved
Right.
from the city to
Exactly.
Wilmette, where we're taping this interview, because the schools are better
Right.
than in the city of Chicago.
And that's true. I mean, we're here in
But not
Wilmette.
everybody can move from the city to Wilmette. Some of the
That's
houses
right.
here are kind of pricey.
Exactly. So New Trier High School, one of the great high
Right.
schools. I went to New Trier High School. You know,
You're a
no-
Trevian.
No, pardon me.
You're a Trevian.
I am, and so you know, why not provide those kinds of school options for all the residents of the state of Illinois?
All right, so we're just getting a little bit specific, not too down in the weeds, but Browner has now come out with a proposal.
Right.
He wants to roll back the income tax
Right.
increase that occurred 4
Yes.
years ago from 5% to 3%.
Right.
He wants to phase that in. He
Right.
says, I'm not sure, maybe over 3 or 4
Right.
years. He wants to broaden the sales taxes you've talked about to other services, but still that whole program, we're talking losing maybe $6 billion in income tax revenue per year if you roll back the income tax rate. And the tax increases he's talking about on services may generate another $500 million. So when you phase that out, even if you do that phase out over a year, over 4 years, so you knock it down an equal amount, 0.5% each
Right.
year, without getting too much in the weeds,
Right.
people say, even if they agree with you and Bruce, it's just not feasible
Well, wait
in
a
the
minute.
short run.
Hold on. Hold
that right?
on. First of all, that's ridiculous, with all due respect, because Illinois only in the last few years has had a 5% income tax. So to say we couldn't possibly survive without it sounds to me to be ahistorical. I mean, my goodness.
Let me
you go
just
back-
interrupt to say, people will say, but we have like $6 to $7 billion still in money that's owed vendors that we simply have paid. I'm not
Right.
talking about long-term debt.
I understand that.
So they're saying, somebody from the Center for Tax and Budget Accountability, like Ralph Martiri, he would say, we have a structural deficit.
Right.
So when you say we've been getting by, he would say, no, we've been just getting by
No.
by cheating.
I'm
and
not
having-
saying you're getting back.
Yeah.
I'm saying there's the fundamental problem with the budget in Illinois and the budget in Chicago comes down to one thing. The economy is not growing fast enough. And if the
So it's
economy does
growth.
not grow
So this
fast
is-
enough,
Gets back to the Laffer idea.
Right.
More economic growth caused by Rauner lowering these tax rates will generate more tax revenue with a lower tax
let
rate.
me give you an
Is that
example of what
you're
I'm talking about. I mean, Texas has no income tax. Texas has no income tax. Guess what? They have a budget surplus right now. How do they do that? How do they have a budget surplus with no income tax? And the reason is because they're creating so many new jobs, so many new businesses, that they're getting tax revenues from putting people back to work. So, this is an Art Laffer truism. The best way to balance your budget is put Americans and put people in the state of Illinois back into jobs so they become taxpayers, not collectors of tax benefits. So that's number one. And by the way, people say, well, you can't possibly do that. 40 years ago, Illinois didn't even have an income tax at all, and it was able to pay its bills. Now, as you say, you've got $6 billion unpaid bills. You've raised your income taxes multiple times. You've got one of the highest corporate income taxes in the country. Maybe the state of Illinois should look at doing it a different way. Well, because there's been a backlash in states like Illinois against doing some of these modern technologies.
Are they saying these are environmental issues?
Yes.
Are they right?
In some
Sometimes?
cases, yeah, of course. Sometimes, if you do drilling, you have to do it in a safe and effective, environmentally protective way. But my point is, you can do that.
You can do it.
And
You
Illinois
can have
could-
nuclear energy too, because we had a lot in
No,
Illinois.
I
Did we
have-
have a lot of nuclear energy? Wasn't it clean? But we stopped, right?
yeah, there's no-
We're not building any nuclear
Right.
plants.
Well, because I'm for whatever works. Okay. If it can be done, if you price efficiently, I'm for nuclear. I'm for hydropower. I'm for coal. I'm for natural gas. I'm for oil. And by the way, if you do the drilling, think of what this means. When you ask me about how can you pay for your public services, if you could have royalties, on that you charge for drilling this oil and getting at the coal, you could raise billions of dollars. And guess what? Then a lot of those financial problems that you and I have been talking about go away. So you create jobs, you have your own businesses that go after the resources, and you raise money for the state to improve your schools and your public services. It's a no-brainer.
Your view, tax rates are very important, lower those tax rates.
Regulations, right to
Regulations
work,
very important,
energy
right to work,
policy.
energy policy.
Yep.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Steve. Steve,
Pleasure.